Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Tristan Rallings. We warmly welcome the family members of Private Charles Emanuel Bonavia and Private Waldemar Beck, whose stories will be told shortly. We are honoured to acknowledge the High Commissioner of Malta to Australia, His Excellency Mr. Charles Muscat and Mrs. Victoria Muscat, who are attending this evening's ceremony. We also warmly welcome the members representing the Maltese Ex-Servicemen's Association of New South Wales, sub-branch of the Returned and Services Leagues Club of Australia, and Mr. Bob Wade representing the 16th Battalion's Foundation Committee. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind two of those on the Roll of Honour, which list the names of the more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection. Today, we remember and pay tribute to Private Charles Emanuel Bonavia and Private Waldemar Beck. Charles Bonavia and Waldemar Beck were friends who immigrated to Australia from Malta in 1911. Charles had been born in Slimar, Valletta, on the 25th of September 1887, the son of Emanuel and Georgina Bonavia. Waldemar was younger, born on the 11th of January 1889 to Lawrence and Carolina Beck of Misida. Charles and Waldemar were probably already friends when they went to Malta University to study engineering and architecture with another friend, Anthony Zereb. After graduating in 1911, Charles left Malta for Western Australia. He established himself in Perth, followed several months later by Waldemar and Anthony, who travelled together. In the short time Charles Bonavia had been in Australia on his own, he had found a wide circle of friends. All three men were engaging in gregarious, and Waldemar and Anthony had a few problems adjusting to life in Australia. All three worked in engineering or draftsman jobs when they could, although Waldemar was obliged to take work as a motor driver to support him on occasion. Charles Bonavia was likely one of the first Maltese migrants to Perth, and he worked tirelessly to help more Maltese come to Australia. He would help newcomers find accommodation and jobs as they arrived, and was soon joined in this task by Waldemar and Anthony. The three ended up becoming friends with important people such as the Governor of the Bishop of Perth. When the Bishop of Perth travelled to Malta for the International Eucharistic Congress in 1913, he spoke highly of the three gentlemen settlers. Charles Bonavia, Anthony Zereb and Waldemar Beck all served in the military forces of their adopted country during the First World War. Charles Bonavia was one of the first three to enlist in the Australian Imperial Force, doing so within weeks of the outbreak of war in August 1914. He left Australia with the first contingent later that year and landed on Gallipoli in the early hours of 25 April 1915. Anthony Zereb enlisted the day after the Gallipoli landings, not knowing that Private Charles Bonavia was already missing in action. The 11th Battalion had become impossibly disorganised during the struggle to establish a perimeter at Anzac, and when the battalion finally had the opportunity to line up on the beach 5 days later, Bonavia was nowhere to be found. Military authorities and Charles Bonavia's family conducted exhaustive inquiries into his whereabouts. As many wounded Australians from Gallipoli were sent to hospital in Malta, Charles's sisters were able to make personal inquiries. Reports varied widely, from statements that he had never landed on the peninsula to claims that he was a prisoner of the Turks and that he had been shot through the hip and was last seen wounded. But none of these stories could be confirmed, and after months of inquiries, military authorities were forced to conclude that Private Charles Bonavia was killed in action at some point during the landing on the 25th of April 1915. His body has never been recovered, and today he is commemorated on the Australian Memorial at Lone Pine. He was 27 years old. Waldemar Beck enlisted in the AIF in September 1916, leaving for active service abroad with reinforcements to the 16th Battalion in the following December. Private Waldemar Beck joined his battalion on the battlefields of the Western Front in June 1917 and was almost immediately drawn into small-scale operations. He wrote to his brother George that it was pretty tough, especially the first time we had to go through no man's land under a heavy barrage, but I do not want to tell you about such things. Thank God I am safe and sound, and I hope to continue to be so. So don't worry about me. In July 1918, the 16th Battalion took part in the Battle of Hamel, a small operation to capture a French village that has long been remembered as a stunning success. Nevertheless, even stunning successes had a cost on the Western Front, and one of those wounded on the 4th of July 1918 was Private Waldemar Beck. Private Waldemar Beck left the battlefield with shell wounds to his right eye and skull. He walked out to the dressing station himself, but had been more seriously wounded than he appeared and died 2 days later in the 8th General Hospital at Rouen. A mate, Frank Bullen, wrote to George Beck to tell him what had happened to his brother and to express his sympathy. He wrote that Waldemar was most popular in the company. He was a general favourite amongst his chums and moreover always did his duty. The OC, officers and remainder of the company joined me in expressing their deep regret at his decease. Waldemar Beck was buried in Bois-Guillaume Communal Cemetery Extension in France. He was 29 years old. Anthony Zareb left Australia for active service overseas with the 25th Battalion on the 29th of June 1915. He would serve throughout the war and was the only one of the three friends to return to Australia, doing so in 1919. Charles Bonavia and Waldemar Beck's names are listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, amongst almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving during the First World War. Their photographs are displayed today beside the pool of reflection. Charles is pictured standing in the left image, whilst Waldemar's portrait is on the right-hand side. These are but some of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Privates Charles Emanuel Bonavia and Waldemar Beck, who gave their lives for us, our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, if you are able, please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.